From the beautiful Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew in West London, I'm Dr. Tasha Ebanks Garcia, and I'm the Cayman Islands Government Representative to the United Kingdom. I'm delighted to be hosting this installment of One Planet Insights, which will air during London Climate Action Week 2023. Now in its 5th year, London Climate Action Week creates a space for people to come together to create solutions for climate change and harnesses the power of London to create global climate action. So I'm here with Colin, who's going to tell us how a plant endemic to the Cayman Islands made its way to London. Colin, before we get into how it made it to London, if you can kind of give us the backstory on why this plant is important and what the urgency is around ensuring it's preserved and protected.
Well, surely, the plants generally provide, and we're in this wonderful cathedral to plants here in the Temperate House at Kew. And the theme for the Temperate House is the world's most threatened plants. We know globally from some work that Kew with a large number of international collaborators, we know that 2 in 5 plants are currently threatened with extinction. So it was a great pleasure. In fact, one of the earliest things I did with the Cayman Islands was we helped Kew Publishing publish the second flora of the Cayman Islands, George Proctor's flora in 2012. And so that's a baseline record of all the plants known in the Cayman Islands. So 415 native plants thought to be uniquely native to the Cayman Islands. 21 unique species with 8 unique varieties. So 29 kind of taxa, species and varieties, that are unique to Cayman, nowhere else in the world. You couldn't conserve the blue iguana if you weren't conserving its habitat. And so that wonderful limestone shrubland habitat around the QE2 Botanic Park, if that wasn't there, then the iguana would have no habitat, nothing to eat. So again, plants are so important. You know, iguanas are largely herbivores, so they're eating fruits and leaves, and so they're living on. So you have to have a well-conserved, thriving habitat in order for your iconic endemic animals to survive. So observation, having people out on the ground, making people aware, and just encourage them to really celebrate their botanical heritage and be part of its future is really what we're trying to promote.
Oh, I just want to thank you so much for your efforts and all of your work, and for remembering the Caribbean and the British Overseas Territories and the work that you're doing here at Kew. In this installment of One Planet Insights, we will showcase the blue iguana, a species endemic to the Cayman Islands, a UK overseas territory. Through interviews, remarks, and a panel discussion, we will shine a spotlight on the crucial importance of the blue iguana to our terrestrial ecosystem, explore the challenges with saving the blues, and the importance of preserving planetary species more broadly.
Our environment is our home. It provides us with the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and it supports the plants and animals that we share this planet with. So environmental protection is not just about saving the planet, it's about protecting our own health, our economy, our future. And so by taking action to protect our environment, we're also taking action to protect ourselves. Unfortunately, our planet is under threat. Climate change, pollution, deforestation are just a few of the problems that we're facing around the world. And it's critically important that we protect the natural world to facilitate a sustainable future, because our natural resources are clearly essential to our survival. Take, for example, Cayman's mangroves, a natural barrier against storm surge and flood defense, home to a huge variety of marine life. Now, the overseas territories generally are blessed with huge biodiversity. They hold around 94% of the UK's total biodiversity, and we absolutely need to protect the many, often unique species of plants and animals that we are fortunate to be custodians of. Grand Cayman is home to one such unique creature, the endemic Blue Iguana, and it was critically endangered. But thanks to the work of the Cayman Islands National Trust Conservation Programme, supported by others, including Cayman's Department for Environment, it is now being protected. Now, the UK, via the Darwin Plus programme, has been able to support this programme, and His Majesty King Charles toured the captive breeding facility and was able to meet Peter, the famous blue iguana, back in 2019. Environmental protection and conservation is essential for our planet's survival, and it's everyone's responsibility. And I hope this episode of One Planet Insights encourages you all to think about your contribution to the solution.
The One Planet Insights docu-series focuses on the overarching theme of biodiversity and interconnectivity. And so it is a great pleasure to be here at Kew Gardens today, where their goal is to contribute to a world where nature is protected, valued by all, and managed sustainably.
Fred, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for taking some time to talk to us about your amazing journey with the Blue Iguanas.
I'm very happy to.
And I'm really enjoying reading your book. It's absolutely stunning. So maybe I could just take you back to 1979 when you arrived in the Cayman Islands. Seems like a long, long time ago. So you came here to look at mosquito control.
I came here from university. It's like nobody knew where the Cayman Islands were. They weren't even shown on the atlas when I went to the university library and tried to look up where the Cayman Islands were. So 1979, yeah, there were about 11,000 people here. Mm-hmm. The island was really, really quiet. I knew nothing about where I was coming to. I didn't know about the people, I didn't know about the wildlife, I found myself in primary habitats, in forests and mangrove wetlands, and suddenly realized that I'm in an environment here that has been like this for thousands, or maybe in some cases millions, literally millions of years. Unchanged, original, natural habitats. This is something I'd never seen in the
Untouched,
UK.
Incredible. Yeah.
And it kind of like is an electrifying experience when you do that for the first time.
So you arrived here and you were tasked with sort of reducing the mosquito population, or it was more of a survey just to understand how to control?
So I came as a research assistant with the Mosquito Research and Control Unit. So I came to work for that operation. I was just coming out for 2 years just to have an experience. I was going to go back and get serious about life. But somehow I never left.
And I can see why. I mean, it's an absolutely incredible place to live. And so you arrived and you were, and I've read in your fascinating book that you were knocking on doors and you came across this red eye.
Yeah, we had an outbreak of Aedes aegypti, which is a disease mosquito, which had come in on the port. So we were in the business of trying to get this back out again. So we were going to everybody's backyards looking for this mosquito breeding in random collections of water. So I went to this house in Georgetown. I knocked on the door, as you always do. Nobody was at home, so I was legally allowed to go around the back of the yard there and start looking for disease mosquitoes. And then looming under the trees there was this like red eye watching me. It was like, what's that? You start peering and you start to see the shape of this creature that's looking at me. It was actually in a cage. It was this huge reptile. I had no idea things like this existed in the world, let alone in Cayman, Huge blue lizard with red eyes, spikes, scales, all this thing going on. And it was looking at me and I was looking at it. And
almost like, prehistoric, right? So there's something about them.
Oh, they look so prehistoric, yeah. But they also, you can see that something's going on. Mm-hmm. They're actually very intelligent animals. They have complex social lives, and so they've got brains that work for figuring out who's who and who's hanging out with who, and who's your enemy and who's your friend, and whose territory is over here and whose territory is over here. So they think it through, they make plans ahead, they carry out plans.
Really
They're very smart animals.
Amazing.
So these things made this crazy impression on me. It's like I needed to know more, you know. So I was talking to farmers, talking to people out in different districts, and I started to hear that up on the northeast coast maybe there might be some iguanas still. So I got together with some friends and we hiked what is now the Queen's Highway, but it was just a trail that ran from north side to Tortuga, looking for these iguanas. We never saw a thing. And it wasn't until much later that we got word from a farmer in East End that there were iguanas on his lands. And we went there, and there were actually 3 iguanas on his land. And this was the very beginning of us learning about what these animals were really about. We tried to get a radio transmitter on one. We picked up their poop and we sifted through it, try and figure out what they were eating. We watched them with binoculars and watched what they were eating.
Amazing.
And we suddenly began to understand that these animals lead a huge diversity of plant matter. They don't just eat this, this and this. They eat 100, 150 different things. It changes with seasons. They eat fruit, they eat flowers, they eat leaves, they eat soil. They even eat animals sometimes. They eat caterpillars.
So why were there so few blues at that time?
In retrospect we know, but at that point we had no idea.
Right.
But now we know. Humans basically start to use habitats. You know, we use land for all kinds of things, but usually when humans start to use land, it changes things for wildlife, and usually not for the better. So habitat loss for the iguanas was not that huge a deal at that point, but it's been getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse ever since.
So I've been trying to save a tree back in London, near where I live, and I was having a conversation with the tree surgeon about it, because it was, no, this tree needs to come down because I know they want to develop the land. But the bit I think they were sort of missing is that it's home to birds. That's what I sometimes think we forget. Maybe this is a creature's home, this is an animal's home, and I think, as you say, maybe all of a sudden, if we are developing, there's less place for the iguanas to live, I guess. Was that also a bit of it?
It's a huge part of it, and it's the huge part of conservation everywhere, because I mean, wild creatures, whether they be plant or animal, they don't do property.
Yeah.
They don't do property boundaries, they don't do property ownership. The trees that sprout up in my garden because the soil is right and the rain is coming down, and they're not thinking this is somebody else's land, I can't be here.
Yeah.
And we just assume that it's our right to say, no, you can't be here, this is my land and I'm going to build a house on it.
Yeah. So I think with extinction and species, and just understanding that this is, as you say, this is their home. So you recognise there weren't that many, and you thought, well, I'm in love with these creatures, I want to do what I can, bring their numbers up. Was it quite intentional?
It wasn't that intentional, no, because what we found out basically is the remaining iguanas that were out in the wild, they weren't even close enough to find each other and breed. So the population was going what we call functionally extinct. It's there, the animals are alive, but they're not breeding anymore. And when they get old enough and die, it's the end. So we had to bring them in and breed them in captivity.
Give nature a helping hand, which is, in a way, if mankind is destroying some of these species, I feel like, well, that's the very least you can do. Because I think sometimes people are like, why do they need to be brought into that facility? They're in a captive space, but it has to be done to give them that head start, right? And then what you then progress to do is then releasing them back into the wild. Yeah,
and the population gets that small, you have to worry about genetics. We needed at least 20 completely unrelated founders to breed in a very controlled sort of way if we wanted to capture the sort of diversity of genetics that was out there in the first place. So we have done it. We've achieved the plan. We've got 1,000+ iguanas that we've
When
released
did
out
you
into the
release
wild.
the 1,000? Your 1,000 one, was it 2018?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even running the program there, but
So you handed the baton over to Luke Harding, who
I'd
currently-
handed the baton over to Luke, who's doing like this incredible job. But bless him, he said, "Here's the 1,000th iguana. Do you want to let it go?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that." So I wandered off into Collier's and let that 1,000th iguana loose. The whole thing about that captive facility is it has been the engine that has driven the restoration of these animals into the wild. What we all want, is for that facility to become completely redundant.
And as you say, that is very much what's at the heart of heart. Everybody has the intentions, they want to drive conservation forward, but it is about getting the money. It is about having the support and the community support. And I think what is incredible is that when you go to the facility and the volunteers who are there and the education piece, because you are relying very much on the people as well. So if people actually value the blue iguanas, and do you think it's a sense of national pride? Is it because they are just, I mean, they are charismatic.
Yeah.
You can't help but fall in love with them.
Yeah, no, it is, and long may it last. The blue iguana is a conservation success story so far, and there are so few of those. You know, we get this depressing diet of how everything is going wrong, how the Amazon is being destroyed, how this species is extinct, and this is going down, and this one's, and it's like oh, it's awful. So people latch on to good stories, and there are so few of them, but they're motivating. They're motivating, and it reminds us we can actually do something. We can make a difference. We can protect land. We can restore species, and you know, anybody who does that needs to shout about it, because the more people doing that, the more will get done.
Well, you're a success story, and as you say, it was a whole group of people who have helped make this a success. But thank you so much. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. And yeah, as I said, I absolutely love the book. And yeah, thank you for the amazing work you've done.
It's been fun.
Right, thank you.
What a fascinating story, and to hear it from Fred Burton himself, what a privilege. Without taking our eye off the blue iguana, we're going to expand the lens a little as we learn about the importance from a biodiversity perspective of preserving planetary species more broadly. To start the conversation, we are delighted to have Dr. Niall McCann, who has been described by Sir David Attenborough as a world authority from the front line. Dr. Niall is a TV presenter, explorer, adventurer, and biologist who has traveled the planet, turning his hand to a variety of adventures, including biological expeditions in some of the most remote parts of the globe. Dr. Niall, tell us why we should care. Why should we be concerned to protect the biodiversity of the planet?
Thanks, Dr. Tasha. Well, it's quite easy for me to say, because I was always going to care about wildlife, because my entire family are biologists. My mum, my dad, and my brothers all studied biology at university, and I grew up totally obsessed with wildlife. To begin with, wildlife was pretty much all I cared about, but very slowly I realized that people are actually quite important too. And I've had to come to accept that when it comes to conservation, people are intrinsic to everything. They are absolutely the problem, but they're the solution too. And I've spent much of my adult life trying to convince people at all levels of society that wildlife matters as much to them as it does to me. Now, most people are now more or less aware of climate change and of the importance to their own lives that we mitigate its effects. But most people are not quite so aware of biodiversity loss, which is unequivocally a more serious issue than climate change. The major problem is that there's actually very little understanding of what biodiversity actually is, or of the impact that biodiversity and its loss or degradation has on human health and wealth and well-being. To summarize, biodiversity is nature. It's the living planet. It's the birds in the air, the fish in the seas, the trees and the plants, and all other living things. Nature generates the oxygen that we breathe, cleans the water we drink, provides us with our food. Nature regulates our climate, and as we are now also painfully aware, it has a regulatory effect on the emergence of new infectious diseases. What we're beginning to understand is that nature performs these functions and so many more most effectively when there's more of it. So it's not just nature alone that we need, but the amount of nature, the biological complexity, the web of life, the infinite network of interactions happening between species, from elephants to amoebas, blue whales to blue iguanas. And this is why a monoculture can never replace an old growth forest, why manicured garden lawns can never replace meadows, and why it matters that we conserve individual species such as the blue iguana and the infinite network of interactions that they facilitate. It's not just that they have a right to existence, which they do, or that we want our children and our grandchildren to have the pleasure of seeing them in the future, which we do. It's that they and we are part of a dynamic ecosystem that needs diversity and complexity to function. So for me, it's clear that if we want our societies and our economies to continue to thrive, we must put nature at the heart of our politics, because we are a part of nature, not apart from nature. And nature is the foundation upon which our economies and our societies are built. If we save nature, we save ourselves.
Interesting. You said something that I don't want to lose. You said we need to make nature part of our politics. What does that look like?
Yeah, I believe that nature firstly needs to be factored in to our economies as its value as opposed to its price. If we think of a tree, we understand that a tree performs an enormous number of absolutely vital services, from flood mitigation to pollination services, reduces the temperature in its environment, so many other things. It generates the oxygen that we're breathing. It creates clouds from transpiration, which then turn into rain, which we need for everything. So a tree has enormous value, but a tree only has a price when it's turned into a commodity such as timber. And what I feel we need to do is we need to give nature a price for just being, because we owe it so much. The World Economic Forum says that over 50% of GDP is moderately or highly dependent upon nature. But really, 100% of everything is dependent upon nature, because we're nature. So I think we need to start factoring that in from the very beginning, and people should be absolutely recompensed for living next to nature, because we all need it.
So some very interesting insights, and I think it makes such a difference when you kind of step back and take a holistic view of the situation, which is something that you've very eloquently captured for us. Turning to Dr. Jenny Daltrey, I'm looking forward to hearing about your work on conservation programs with NGOs and government partners across the Caribbean. By way of introduction, Dr. Jenny is a renowned wildlife conservationist and ecologist with around 30 years professional experience in over 30 countries, and has worked on a wide range of initiatives to restore ecosystems, save endangered species, and benefit local communities. Dr. Jenny, can you share with us some of the successes that you've had in your work, as well as some of the challenges that you think we will still face as we continue to advance work to protect the blue iguana?
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Tasha. First of all, I want to congratulate the government and the people of the Cayman Islands for your commitment and success in saving the blue iguana. I've been following that case for many years, and it's an absolute model example of how to save a species. And as you know, the Cayman Islands are, of course, just one of 6 UK overseas territories in the wider Caribbean, along with Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, Montserrat, Turks and Caicos. And what I find amazing is that, all of these territories combined have a land area that's smaller than London, and yet they have over 4 times more unique species than the whole of the United Kingdom, species like the blue iguana. But the Caribbean suffered higher extinction rates than any other region. And if you consider, for example, all the reptiles that have gone extinct in recent history, over 65% of them were from the Caribbean. So the blue iguana has had a very lucky escape. And I think it's worth thinking, well, why are they disappearing from these islands? Well, there's so many pressures, severe and ongoing habitat loss, which these days involves often tourism developments along the coasts. Climate change hitting the islands so hard now. Caribbean wildlife like the blue iguana are adapted to cope with hurricanes and droughts to some extent, but these are getting worse and worse. But the number one problem that I see that all islands face is invasive alien species. And in fact, at least 2/3 of all extinctions on islands are due to species that were put there by people, like rats, goats, mongooses. And I feel we aren't doing enough to prevent this tidal wave of extinctions. All small islands are struggling to find the resources that they need, and many people will think, well, what use is that iguana or that bird or that bat anyway? But happily, I'm seeing now many cases where species have been saved from extinction. And what I find really exciting is how every case seems to either deliberately or inadvertently bring just so many benefits for people too. I could cite dozens and dozens of other examples of where communities and governments are saving endangered species in their habitats, such as the St. Lucia Amazon and the Union Island gecko. And we're learning that the consequences of this can be even more amazing than that. And as I said earlier, when we eradicate rats from islands, seabird colonies start to recover. And recent studies have shown that seabirds bring lots of nutrients back to the island, that help plants grow, that feed the coral reefs, which results in significantly bigger and healthier fish populations. And Dr. Niall a moment ago spoke about this living web that connects all living things, but who on earth would have guessed 30 years ago that saving snakes on an island is going to help fisheries? And other studies from the UK overseas territories have proved that when you restore healthy ecosystems, both on land and in the sea, the islands become much better at buffering the impacts of hurricanes, storm surges and droughts, which essentially protects communities living on those vulnerable islands too. So is saving species like the blue iguana and the Antiguan racer or the Montserrat mountain chicken worth it? I mean, yes, from what I've seen over the past 30 years, investing in conserving wildlife is essentially investing in biodiversity, tourism, livelihoods, education, science, human health, culture, ecosystem services, and even enhancing resilience to climate change, which are all great reasons to act. But bear in mind that right now, as we're sitting here, many hundreds of species face extinction in the Caribbean territories alone. You know, our resources and efforts clearly need to be stepped up a whole lot more. Anyway, finally, just to wrap up, may I express my admiration again to the Cayman Islands for what you have done to save the blue iguana. There's so much that we can all learn from your techniques and experiences. And I really hope that to see more exchanges between the UK overseas territories on how to conserve endangered species, but also to help us better understand and capture and communicate the multiple benefits that can result from this. So thank you.
One of the things that you shared that I've been kind of thinking about is this idea of, but just one. Like, what does it matter if we lose just one species? So what does it matter if we lost the blue iguana? And you were sharing, Dr. Jenny, the connection between the snake and the fisheries. And, you know, and Dr. Niall, kind of the connection of the ecosystem, and that one missing piece or one piece taken out then has, I guess, a ripple effect. Is that how you describe it, through the ecosystem? What happens if we do take one species out? What does that mean for the ecosystem as a whole? I mean, I imagine the whole thing won't collapse, but what will happen?
Well, it is a bit like, I mean, well, as Dr. Niall said, it is, you know, I refer to this web of life, and that's often how we see there is an interconnection. And just like a spider's web, if you poke a hole in it, probably the rest of the web will still function and still catch flies and do whatever else the spider wants to do. If you start poking another hole and another hole and another hole, you know, at some point it's going to collapse. And at the moment, we've actually already lost a lot. A lot of species have gone already. We don't know how many holes we can continue tearing in this web before human existence itself is at stake. So, you know, why not play safe? Why not look after what we have? And as I think I've shown there, just some of these examples, you know, we don't really know what's important and what the knock-on benefits will be, but they can be really important and can be really astonishing. So we should just try and, I think, conserve as much nature as possible.
Dr. Tasha, want to make a frivolous comparison, but if we think of a really successful high street, it's a high street with a lot of independent shops and there's no monopolies. And so in biology, the term is intransitive competition. If you have lots of things competing with each other, more things thrive. If you start removing one or two of those bits, then certain species start to monopolize. So if you shut down a shop on the high street and Tesco's moves in, then you shut down another and Tesco's moves into the next one, and all of a sudden everyone's shopping at Tesco's and all of the other shops shut. The equivalent is happening in biology. One or two of these little pieces being taken away, and then something comes in and starts to monopolize. And all of a sudden you end up with a very simple system which can perform none of the services that a complex system is able to do. All of the things that Dr. Jenny just described so eloquently, from improving fisheries to mitigating climate change. So this intransitive competition, the infinite number of interactions between all of these species are critical to enabling environments and ecosystems to perform the functions that we need to survive.
And I'm wondering, those people who are watching this and thinking, well, I'm one person, and what difference can one person make? I mean, certainly, the two of you are making a world of difference across the globe, but individuals at home in their own spaces that aren't environmentalists, that aren't conservationists, that don't have the skills and experience that you do, that you can lend to the work that you do, what can we do? And what difference does one person make?
Everyone can make a difference in their own way. Everyone has got skills and talents and is in a place, whether they are in the UK or they're, living in a biodiversity rich island, through the lifestyle choices we make is one, of course, through the purchases we make, making sure we buy sustainably, making sure we use energy efficiently. That's all really important. If you can, it's great to get involved in conservation efforts, whether it's in your backyard or whether it's with an international conservation group, but volunteering your time can make a huge difference. I struggle to find an answer because I think I've worked with so many people who come from different backgrounds. I work with jewellery makers, I work with engineers, I've worked with foresters, and everyone has these unique sets of skills that we all need in conservation. And if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not really sure where to start, reach out to us. Try and, I'm sure we can find great ways for you to get involved. Or, of course, you can become incredibly wealthy and donate your money and support a good cause. So that's also really good too.
I think what Dr. Jenny said is really important, that conservation should be for everybody, because conservation is about saving the planet. And if you're not for the planet, then really what are you for? So we should all be conservationists. Conservation needs everybody anyway. And as Dr. Jenny said, everybody has skills that can contribute, but we also have influence. And that influence can be just on your friends and your family. It's by encouraging them to make sustainable choices. It can be as a voter. We all can elect the right politicians to be in place who will put in the policies that will protect the planet in perpetuity. We have influence on our employers as well. You as an employee, your labour is powerful, and you can influence the direction that your employers take in terms of their sustainability policies. And I think a big thing to remember is that making moves towards sustainability also make your life better. If you cycle rather than drive, you will live longer because your heart is better off, you are fit, you're out. We know the mental health benefits of being in the outside. We know how that is improved when you're surrounded by a greater diversity of species, like listening to birdsong, smelling the blossom, hearing the insects buzzing. These things make us feel better. So having an interest in conservation makes your life better and makes the world better around you. It's a win-win situation, and I hope everybody does it.
I remember through the pandemic watching the images of the world and watching nature thrive as we kind of took a step back, or were forced to take a step back and away from nature. Do you think that the benefits and the lessons that we learned through the pandemic, and there were lots of statements about how things will be coming out of the pandemic, when we come back in nature, when we come back to the workplace, when we come back to our lives as we knew it, that things would change because of that experience. Do you think that we actually really did learn from that experience, learn from stepping away and watching nature thrive in our absence, or have we just gone back to what was before?
I think we have, yeah, I think a lot of people have found a way to connect with nature during that time. But at the same time, as a result, partly of the pandemic, the economies have tightened, people are finding the cost of living getting higher and higher. And in a way, it almost seems like the first thing that gets forgotten and sacrificed is conservation and nature. And one of the things that really struck me, a recent statistic, is, we saw during the pandemic more people using protected areas, more people visiting their local national park for recreation, for these mental health benefits, to kind of breathe again. And yet, when you actually look at all the protected areas on the planet, there are actually more people employed in the UK in the hair and beauty industry than are managing the protected areas in the entire globe. We just don't actually invest, we are not investing enough in those rangers, those wardens, those community outreach people, the teachers, the other people who are looking after essentially the most important parts of the planet to keep all of us alive. So yes, I think a lot of us have kind of woken up and started to connect with nature, but we need to actually value it. And Dr. Niall referred to this price. It is valuable to us, and we need to look after it properly.
Let's just think of the cost of COVID still being calculated, but running into the tens of trillions of dollars. And COVID came from a breakdown in conservation. It was a zoonotic transfer from an unknown species, but a species of probably bat into probably an intermediate, and then into people. And so what we've also seen is that in the past 50 years, the rate of emergence of new infectious diseases has quadrupled. And that's as a result of us pushing into nature more and interfering, for want of a better word. I think what you described, Dr. Tasha, was that when nature's left alone, it rebounds. What we need to resist is our instincts to interfere. If we allow nature some space, it can do its thing. And that's the hardest thing for people to do, because we're manually dexterous and we like to tinker with stuff. And we feel we can tech our way out of problems, when really the best tech that exists to mitigate climate change is a tree. The best tech that exists is out there, created by nature anyway. And that has to be the biggest learning, that we need to give nature a bit more space to do its thing.
I like that, giving nature space. So the inspiration for this docu-series was London Climate Action Week, and it will be launched during London Climate Action Week 2023. How important are events and engagements like London Climate Action Week, which bring people together, which serve as a platform for sharing ideas from different parts of industry and society? What value to the efforts as a whole do events like London Climate Action Week bring, in your opinion?
I think the opportunity to sort of learn from each other is so valuable. It's if we're scattered across in our own communities or different countries, we're all sort of essentially reinventing the wheel. We keep finding similar problems and then trying to figure our way through it. And there's just so much to be learned from just talking to each other and understand, well, what worked in the Cayman Islands could well work in Anguilla, or or even here in London in the UK. So yeah, I think it's healthy and good to look at what each other are doing, see what I can learn from that, what I can adapt and take from that. And I think in the old days of conservation, it used to be just folks from the UK and folks from America going down teaching and training people what to do. What I'm seeing now a lot more is people from these small island developing states and overseas territories actually teaching each other. And actually, in many ways, their experiences are far more valid. And, there's just such talent and brilliance, as we've seen in the Blue Iguana project, that kind of help teach each other to do conservation better.
I agree. So there's that practical element of the sharing of ideas and the importance of not duplicating effort and duplicating finance when there is a limited amount of money to go around for projects. So there's that practical side, but there's also a really important emotional side as well. And that's that people that join into these events realize that they're not alone in trying to save the planet. There are other people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are also trying to save the planet in their own way. And having that emotional resilience, knowing that it's not just you against the man, it is you and a wonderful army of dedicated, caring, intelligent, compassionate people. I think that makes a really big difference in geeing us up emotionally as well.
So it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and experience, which inspire and inform on the very immediate issue of conserving the planet's biodiversity. Once numbered in the tens of thousands, by 2001, there were fewer than 30 blue iguanas estimated to be living in the wild in Grand Cayman, and the species was listed as critically endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. As a result of the local conservation program run by the National Trust for the Cayman Islands in association with the Department of Environment, the blue iguanas were downgraded from the red list to endangered in 2012, and in 2018, the 1,000th blue iguana was released into the wild.
Dylan, it was amazing this morning to release that iguana with you. I have to say, it'll be one of those moments I'll never forget. How many iguanas have you now released into the wild?
Personally?
Yeah.
I've probably released like 60 iguanas since I've been here with the Blue Iguana conservation.
And for you, that's the kind of moment of success, that you've got them to a place where you're comfortable and confident to let them go. And I mean, I was, as I was saying, I was like, oh, do they want to go? But for you, that was the point where actually, yes, we've actually done a good job, and we can now send them when they need to be going back.
Yes, I very much do enjoy the releases. I really want to see as much blue iguanas out in the wild as possible. So, it feels really rewarding to be working here at the Blue Iguana Conservation for the National Trust, and, being able to be a part of repopulating the wild population.
Yeah. And you grew up on Grand Cayman?
I grew up here in Grand Cayman. I'm a Caymanian, yes.
And it's wonderful. I mean, I've been here now a few times, and I've seen you out there and talking to visitors, and also just looking after the animals, and you seem incredibly comfortable and trained up.
So with this place, it was actually the first time I got the opportunity to work in the conservation part of it. So we're also doing other stuff behind the scenes, kind of like vet stuff in a sense. So we're doing like blood works, necropsy and all that, and I would have never done that on my own. So it's very, very awesome to be able to experience that here.
And in relation to other members of the community, friends, etc., is there something? Do you think there's things that can be done to get more people involved? Is there still more education needed, awareness raising? Or do you think generally the majority of people actually are so proud of having this iconic species as being endemic to the Cayman Islands and to Grand Cayman?
Well, I know we as a National Trust, we're, definitely trying to get the word out more. And then here at Blue Iguana Conservation, we do get a good amount of volunteers, and we're trying to, put more of that information out there through, for example, social media. We've currently released an app where the community can get involved with, taking photos and giving us the locations of iguanas that they find out in the wild. And we got an education department where they're going into schools and stuff and trying to educate them. With this building behind us is actually an educational center where we can bring school groups in, have them experience all of this firsthand instead of, just seeing it off a video.
That's amazing. And I think getting that engagement is important, because some of the threats, so when I was talking to Fred last week, he was explaining that you're releasing the mature iguanas, but you're not seeing many hatchlings. Now, are there other things that people can do to just help increase their chances of survival when they're that small?
Try to leave, a couple of the native trees and stuff around the place. Don't just go ahead and fill your entire lot full of marl and cement and stuff. Kind of have a natural environment going on, some kind of garden for them.
And is it important also so what you're sitting on, can you explain what this is? Because this is what you would put out there when you put them in the wild, right?
Yes.
Do people create little structures like that, or is it just making sure the vegetation and the natural land there are spaces like that?
So The blue iguana is a Grand Cayman or rock iguana species. They prefer to live their life on the ground. They will find like a little cave or something to sleep in. They might burrow into the ground and make like a little chamber to sleep in. It all depends on that iguana's preference. So we build these artificial hides to imitate the caves.
Okay.
And once we're releasing these iguanas from here, we'll put them into one of these out in the wild, because we currently raise them in captivity here with them, so they have the option to either, you know, take to the hide or dig into the earth and make their home.
And have you got any stories that, before we come to a close, of any sort of takeaway of your last 2 years? Any sort of, what would you say would be your highlight moment that you sort of think, wow, I pinch myself, I was doing that? Or no, you were saying to me you're a very logical person, so you're probably not like me having lots of pinch me moments.
Yeah, no, the closest thing to pinch me moment would definitely be, like I said earlier, the releases. I find it, you know, very important to have as much of these out there in the wild as possible. So like, I look forward to every single release that we have.
Yeah. Well, incredible work you're all doing here, and thank you for taking time to speak. There is so much work that just goes in looking after the iguanas on a day-to-day basis, and of course you're educating and trying to, you know, create awareness at the same time. But yeah, it's such a pleasure to meet you and to have a chance to watch all of this happen in action.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you too. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And I hope that, you know, this reaches the audience and we can get more awareness out there.
The evidence is clear. Nature is our life support system. All of our economies, all of our societies are embedded in the natural world. And it's the biodiversity and ecosystems of that natural world that provide us all with oxygen, nutrients, water, shelter, regulate disease, critically regulate the climate, all of which is essential for our economic prosperity and societal well-being. But it's also the connectivity between ecosystems and the biodiversity that makes up those ecosystems that's an absolutely essential part of nature. Connectivity ensures the functioning of ecosystems. It helps support the survival of wild animals and plant species. It's vital for genetic diversity, and it supports adaptation to climate change. Biodiversity, which is the foundation of all life on Earth, is essential for resilience and productivity in nature. Much like how a portfolio of financial assets can help reduce risks and uncertainty, so too with diversity in biodiversity can we strengthen the resilience of ecosystems, providing more resilient nature, more productive nature overall. This decade is an absolutely critical period for nature conservation and recovery. We now know that the relationship between biodiversity and climate is interdependent, and that societies must tackle both in tandem. Indeed, if we fail on either the biodiversity or the climate crisis, we will fail on both. We now need to achieve the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework targets set out last year at the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we need to tackle the impact of climate on nature to enable thriving nature for a sustainable future. It's dedicated, successful conservation programs like the Blue Iguana Conservation Program that shows that science can turn into action for nature, for people, and for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this installment of One Planet Insights focused on saving the blues. This docu-series shines a spotlight on the Cayman Islands' long-standing history of environmental protection and conservation, while also looking at the overarching theme of biodiversity and interconnectivity as we come to a better understanding of how this all fits within the global ecosystem. Over the last 2 million years, parts of the Cayman Islands have continually remained above water, despite drastic fluctuations in global sea levels. During that time, the Cayman Islands have been gradually colonized by plants and animals. Over time, some of these have evolved into species and subspecies that are unique to the Cayman Islands. The blue iguana is one of these. Once numbering in the tens of thousands, the blue iguana is now preserved by the National Trust under the Blue Iguana Conservation Program.
The National Trust for the Cayman Islands is an organization that was founded primarily to protect, conserve, and educate our local community, Cayman Islands community, about what is unique and important to us, whether it's from an environmental standpoint or when we're talking heritage, such as our historic homes. And we have over 25 sites, both historic and environment, that fall under our protection.
I run Blue Iguana Conservation here on behalf of the National Trust for the Cayman Islands and in partnership with the DOE and other key partners that are based here. So Blue Iguana Conservation, as the name suggests, is a conservation program aimed at conserving Grand Cayman's endemic blue iguana. So the blue iguana is a remarkable species. Firstly and most iconically because it's a bright blue lizard and it's one of the rarest iguanas in the world. In 2001 there was estimated to be less than 25 blue iguanas in the world, and through the work done by the National Trust and the Blue Iguana Conservation Program, we've brought that number up closer to 1,000 animals, which is just a great story about how this iconic reptile went from so endangered to back. The blue iguana play such an important role here on the island. They're ambassadors for Grand Cayman. You're the only place in the world with a bright blue iguana. They're a tourist attraction. People want to come and see them. But they have a really important ecological niche as well. So these guys are seed dispersers. So naturally out there in the wild, they're responsible for a lot of how the island used to get its different plant species and spread them around, and they're proper creatures of habit. You know, we're really lucky. Obviously our long-term goal is to have this species self-sustaining in the wild and the need for the captive element gone. But whilst we have our captive facility to support the conservation efforts, it gives us this remarkable window into the private lives of these animals. You know, they have this whole secret world that we're only just starting to learn about, like how they interact with their babies and how they feed and their morning routines. And they really are these charismatic animals. They're so designed and evolved to be specialists for the island that they live on. They're Caymanian through and through. But there's a lot of challenges they face. So even though we've had this remarkable story, there's still a long way to go. But we're incredibly proud of the blue iguana. We're incredibly proud to be able to be involved in playing a small part in the remarkable 30-year journey for this species.
We have not inherited this earth from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children. So we see ourselves in the National Trust getting up every morning doing what we do because we are protecting the legacy we borrowed from our children.
From the magical Kew Gardens, which date back to the early 18th century as a former royal palace, to the present day as a globally renowned scientific institution and home to the largest and most diverse botanical and mycological collections in the world. I challenge you to explore ways in which you can make a contribution to leaving this world a little better than you found it.
Hello everyone, I am Leonie Tibbetts, Miss World Cayman Islands 2022. Protecting the endemic species of the Cayman Islands is very important for our biodiversity. These species have a unique adaptation to our environment and play a key role in maintaining the balance within our ecosystem. Each and every element of our ecosystem relies on one another. As someone who loves these three islands, it is very important that each element is protected, including our blue iguanas. Not only are they magnificent and beautiful, but they're quite resilient, having recovered from just 30 iguanas in 2001 to now seeing numbers over 1,000 in 2019. Having seen them thriving in their natural environment is important to me, but it is also important to the ecosystem at large that these animals are protected.
Growing up in Cayman, I've always associated our blue iguanas with Grand Cayman. And even more than that, I love going to the botanic gardens with my family and friends, or volunteering at the Blue Iguana Conservation Center and being able to watch our blue iguanas. It's absolutely amazing watching our blue iguanas move through the environment, interact with each other, interact with you, watching the way they ate their nonis and their leaves. And that is something that I really value and something I hope that future generations will be able to experience and enjoy.
The blue iguana is important to me because Grand Cayman, the island that I live in, probably would not look the way it does today without its presence. And I mean that both metaphorically and literally, because the role it plays in the ecosystem is that of a seed disperser. Seed dispersers dictate the vegetation composition across the island. Vegetation composition impact things like groundwater, weather, food provision, big things that impact how people settle and live their lives. So that is why the blue iguana is important to me.
I really want to protect the blue iguanas, and I've had a lot of experience with them since my mom works with them. And I remember sponsoring a blue iguana and then releasing it back into the wilds.
Protecting endemic species in the Cayman Islands is important because of the biodiversity that they offer. Endemic species play crucial roles in their ecosystems. So protecting endemic species not only safeguards Cayman's biodiversity, but it ensures the long-term health and stability of local ecosystems.
I believe it's super important to protect blue iguanas because they're the only one of their kind, and you can only find them in Cayman, and they're just like an intrinsic part of Cayman's identity, and therefore it's just so important to protect them.
It's important to protect endemic species because, especially living in Cayman, they're unique to our country, and if they run out and if they die, then there's no other place in the world where we can experience such beautiful creatures.
I think it's critical to protect endemic species in Cayman, specifically blue iguanas, because it's incredibly special that they're animals and parts of nature that we can only experience here. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that our descendants and the people who will live here after us get to experience that as well, and that we don't let such incredible creatures die out or go extinct under our watch.
I'd say it's important to preserve Cayman's endemic species, especially because of how small we are here, because if we as a community don't protect them, nobody else will. If you look at like all the other countries in the world, like huge populations and whatnot, there's always going to be someone to protect the species. But if we as a community don't look and put our mind towards protecting these guys, they'll be gone forever. It's because it's just 3 islands and a couple handful of these creatures roaming around. And once they're gone, and they're gone forever. And us being the gem of the Caribbean, we have our own little gems, which is these endemic species, specifically the blue iguana. There's no one more Caymanian than a blue iguana.